The church went silent when the bride screamed. Amara Johnson stood frozen at the altar, her hands shaking, her white dress clutched in her fists, while the man she had just married slowly stood up from his wheelchair. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a Bible. The pastor whispered, "Lord, have mercy," and Amara's voice broke as she stared at her husband in terror. You can walk?" The crippled beggar smiled, and that was the moment Amara realized she hadn't just married a poor man. She had married a lie. In the quiet village of Willow Creek, everyone knew Amara Johnson. Not because she was loud, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was good. At 19, Amara carried herself with a gentleness that made people lower their voices when she passed. She wore long dresses, kept her hair neatly braided, and never looked a man in the eyes for too long. Folks said she was old-fashioned, raised the way girls used to be raised. In truth, she had been shaped by hardship, not choice. She lived in a small wooden house at the edge of the village with her grandmother, Mama Ruth, a proud black woman whose body was failing but whose spirit never bent. Mama Ruth had raised Amara since she was 5, after her parents died in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway. Since then, Amara had been daughter, nurse, and provider, all in one fragile body. Every morning before sunrise, Amara swept the church steps. By noon, she worked at the village grocery store. At night, she read scripture aloud to her grandmother while rubbing oil into her swollen legs. She never complained, and because of that, the village trusted her. Men respected her. Women praised her. Mothers told their daughters, "Be like Amara," but admiration did not pay hospital bills. One humid afternoon, Amara stood in the hallway of the county hospital, clutching a folded piece of paper so tightly her fingers trembled. The doctor had spoken gently, but the words hit like stones. "Your grandmother's condition is worsening," he said. "She needs treatment soon. Without it, I'm sorry." The number at the bottom of the bill was more than Amara made in a year. That night, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, while Mama Ruth slept fitfully beside her. "Baby," Mama Ruth whispered suddenly, eyes still closed. "You crying?" Amara wiped her face quickly. "No, ma'am." Mama Ruth turned her head slowly, wisdom heavy in her tired eyes. "Don't lie to God," she said softly. "He sees tears even when people don't." Amara broke. She knelt beside the bed and wept, quietly, pressing her forehead against her grandmother's thin hand. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I prayed, I worked, I did everything right." Mama Ruth squeezed her fingers weakly. "Sometimes," she murmured, "God answers prayers in ways we don't expect." The next Sunday, Amara sat in the front pew as usual, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The church was fuller than normal. Whispers filled the room, heads turned toward the door. Then she saw him. A man in a worn jacket sat near the back of the church, his body slumped, his legs motionless, his hands resting on the arms of a wheelchair. His face was tired, his beard untrimmed, his eyes distant but sharp. People avoided looking at him. The pastor cleared his throat. "We have a visitor today," he announced, "a man in need of help." Amara felt a strange tightening in her chest. The pastor continued, voice heavy. "And sometimes, help requires sacrifice." Amara did not know why, but at that moment she felt something shift, like the ground beneath her faith had begun to move. She had no idea that the man in that wheelchair was about to change her life forever. The man in the wheelchair did not introduce himself. He simply sat there, head slightly bowed, hands folded, as if he were the one attending his own judgment. His clothes were clean but old, the kind of clothes that had lived many lives. The wheels of his chair were scratched, one of them wobbling faintly whenever he shifted. People stared, some with pity, others with discomfort, a few with quiet disgust. Amara noticed all of it. When the service ended, the pastor did not dismiss the congregation as usual. Instead, he cleared his throat again and gestured toward the back of the church. "Our visitor's name is Elias," he said. "He has no family here, no home, no one." A murmur passed through the pews. The pastor continued, "There is a charitable housing program willing to help him, but only if he has a wife." The room went silent. Amara felt her spine straighten. A wife? Elias lifted his head for the first time. His eyes moved across the room, not pleading, observing, calm, almost unreadable. "This program," the pastor added carefully, "is meant to help disabled men reintegrate into society, but it requires stability." A woman near the back scoffed softly. Another whispered, "Why should that be our problem?" Amara's chest tightened. She didn't know Elias, but something about the way he sat, quiet, dignified, made her uncomfortable with the murmurs. Then the pastor said the words that would echo in her nightmares for weeks. "We are asking for a volunteer." No one moved. Women avoided eye contact. Men stared at the floor. Mothers clutched their daughters' hands instinctively. Amara felt her heart pounding as she realized what was happening. The pastor's gaze drifted forward. It landed on her. "Amara," he said gently, "you have always served this church with a pure heart." The room turned toward her all at once. Heat rushed to her face. "Pastor," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "You're kind," he continued, "selfless, God-fearing." Her breath caught. Someone behind her muttered, "She's perfect for it." Another voice said, "She's still a virgin." Amara's hands trembled in her lap. She stood suddenly. "No," she said, louder this time. "I can't." A few gasps followed. The pastor looked surprised. "Child? I don't even know him," Amara said, her voice shaking but firm. "Marriage isn't charity." Silence fell again. Elias watched her closely now. For the first time, his expression changed, not to anger, but something like respect. "I wouldn't ask you to," he said quietly. His voice was calm, educated, deep. "I don't want pity," Elias continued, "and I don't want a woman forced into a life she didn't choose." A ripple of surprise moved through the church. Amara looked at him then, really looked at him. There was no bitterness in his eyes, no desperation, only dignity. The pastor sighed. "We will pray on it," he said. That night, Amara sat beside her grandmother's bed, the sound of crickets drifting through the open window. Mama Ruth listened as Amara explained everything. When she finished, Mama Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "What kind of man refuses pity?" Amara didn't answer. Mama Ruth turned to her, eyes serious. "Baby," she said, "sometimes God tests hearts, not bodies." Amara swallowed. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a wheelchair creaked as it rolled over gravel, and Amara didn't know why, but she felt like her life had already begun to slip beyond her control. The village did not wait for God's answer. By Monday morning, the whispers had already grown teeth. Amara heard them at the grocery store, felt them in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, tasted them in the forced smiles women gave her as if she were already pitiful. She said no to a man in need. Too proud for charity. Maybe she thinks she's better than the rest of us. By Tuesday, the whispers had turned into pressure. The pastor came by the house just after noon. Amara was washing dishes, while Mama Ruth lay resting on the couch, her breathing shallow, her skin dull with sickness. "Amara," the pastor said gently, removing his hat, "may I sit?" She dried her hands slowly and nodded. "I won't speak long," he continued. The housing board needs an answer by the end of the week. Elias will be sent back to the city shelter if we can't help him." Amara swallowed. "That's terrible," she said. "But why me?" The pastor looked at her carefully. "Because you are strong, because you are faithful, because you are untouched." The word landed heavy. "I don't think that makes me obligated," Amara replied. The pastor sighed. "Marriage has never been easy, child, but sometimes it is a calling." When he left, the house felt smaller. That night, Mama Ruth's fever worsened. Amara held her hand, counting breaths, praying between sobs. "Baby," Mama Ruth whispered weakly, "come closer." Amara leaned down. "You think I don't know what folks are asking of you?" Her grandmother murmured. "I've lived too long not to hear God's footsteps." Amara shook her head. "I can't marry a man I don't love. I can't give my life away like that." Mama Ruth squeezed her hand, with what little strength she had left. "Love don't always come first," she said softly. "Sometimes mercy does." Amara's tears fell onto the blanket. "What if I ruin my life?" she asked. Mama Ruth smiled faintly. "And what if you save someone else's?" The words stayed with her. 2 days later, Amara found Elias outside the church, alone beneath the oak tree, his wheelchair angled toward the sunlight. She hesitated before approaching. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. "I come here to think," Elias replied. "It's quiet." She stood awkwardly, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry about the way people talk," she said finally. He smiled slightly. "People fear what they don't understand." She nodded. "Do you want to get married?" He looked up at her then, surprised by the directness. "No," he said honestly. "I want to be chosen, not assigned." Amara's heart tightened. They sat in silence for a while, the wind rustling leaves above them. "My grandmother is sick," Amara said suddenly. "She raised me. She's all I have." Elias listened. "I don't know what faith is supposed to feel like," Amara continued, her voice breaking. "But right now it feels like standing on a cliff." Elias nodded slowly. "Then don't jump unless you choose to." That night, Amara prayed harder than she ever had in her life. She did not ask God for money. She did not ask for certainty. She asked for peace. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, she found it. The next morning, she walked into the pastor's office with her back straight and her hands steady. "I'll do it," she said. The pastor's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "Yes," Amara replied. "But not as charity, as choice." When she told Elias later that day, he was silent for a long moment. "You don't owe me this," he said. "I know," she answered. "That's why I'm offering it." The wedding was set quickly. No celebration, no excitement, just necessity. On the eve of the ceremony, Amara sat alone in her room, staring at the simple white dress folded on her bed. She was still a virgin, still a village girl, still afraid, but she was no longer unsure. Outside, the night was quiet, and somewhere in that quiet, 2 lives were already moving toward a truth neither of them could yet imagine. The morning of the wedding arrived without celebration. No music drifted through Willow Creek. No children ran through the dirt paths laughing. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that threatened rain, but never quite delivered it, as if even the weather was holding its breath. Amara woke before dawn. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, listening to the house settle around her. Mama Ruth slept in the next room, her breathing uneven but steady. Amara whispered a prayer of thanks for that alone. The dress hanging from the closet door was plain white, borrowed from the church. It was modest, long-sleeved, with a high neckline, nothing like the gowns Amara had seen in magazines behind the grocery counter. Still, when she slipped it over her head and looked at her reflection in the small mirror, her breath caught. She looked like a bride, but she did not feel like one. By mid-morning, the church had filled with people. Not out of excitement, but curiosity. Amara could feel it the moment she stepped inside, the weight of eyes, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. She walked slowly down the aisle alone. No father, no music, just the sound of her shoes against the wooden floor. At the front of the church, Elias waited in his wheelchair, dressed in a clean black suit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. For the first time, Amara noticed how sharp his features were, how calm his eyes remained, even as the room buzzed with quiet judgment. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod. Not ownership, not expectation, acknowledgement. The pastor began the ceremony with familiar words, his voice echoing through the sanctuary. Amara listened, but everything sounded distant, like she was underwater. In sickness and in health. Her chest tightened. She glanced at Elias. He was watching her, not the pastor, watching as if gauging her comfort, her fear. When it came time for vows, the pastor paused. "Elias," he said, "do you take Amara Johnson to be your wife?" "I do," Elias answered calmly. His voice was steady, certain. The pastor turned to Amara. She hesitated. The entire church leaned forward. She thought of Mama Ruth's hand in hers, of the hospital bill folded in her pocket, of the way Elias had refused pity and offered her dignity instead. "I do," she said. The words echoed louder than she expected. A few people sighed. Others whispered. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," a hush fell over the room. Elias did not move. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly and rested it gently over Amara's heart. "If it's all right," he said softly, "I'll wait." Amara's eyes burned. She nodded. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Light, respectful, brief. The ceremony ended without applause. Outside, people offered stiff congratulations. Some forced smiles, some avoided them entirely. Vanessa King stood at the edge of the churchyard, arms crossed, eyes sharp with disbelief. "She really did it," she muttered. "Married a crippled beggar." Amara heard her. She said nothing. That afternoon, the couple was driven to a small house on the edge of the village, a place arranged through the same charity program. One bedroom, one narrow hallway, one quiet beginning. Inside, the silence was heavy. Amara placed her small bag on the bed and turned to Elias. "I'll sleep on the floor," she said quickly. "There's no need," Elias replied. "I'll take the couch." She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said gently. "But I want to." Night fell slowly. Amara sat on the bed, hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding. She had never been alone with a man before, never crossed this threshold. The door creaked softly behind her. Elias rolled into the room, stopping a few feet away. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "Before this marriage goes any further, you deserve the truth." Her pulse raced, and in the stillness of that room, with her wedding dress folded beside her, Amara felt the ground beneath her shift once again. Amara's heart pounded so loudly she was sure Elias could hear it. The small bedroom felt tighter than before, the air thick with words that had not yet been spoken. The lamp on the bedside table cast a soft yellow glow, stretching shadows along the walls. Amara stood near the bed, her fingers twisting nervously together, as Elias remained a short distance away in his wheelchair. "You deserve the truth," he repeated quietly. She nodded, though her throat felt dry. "Okay." Elias inhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "Nothing I'm about to say will take away the respect I have for you," he said. "And if you want to walk away after tonight, I won't stop you." That frightened her more than anything else. He placed his hands firmly on the arms of the wheelchair. For a brief moment, Amara thought he was only adjusting himself, but then she saw the muscles in his arms tighten, his shoulders shifted, the wheelchair creaked softly. And then, Elias stood, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. He rose to his full height, taller than she expected, his legs strong and unmoving beneath him. The wheelchair tipped backward and clattered softly onto the floor. Amara screamed. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, her entire body shaking. Her mind raced, unable to process what her eyes were seeing. You can walk," she gasped. Elias raised both hands immediately. "Please don't be afraid." Her knees felt weak. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, staring at him as if he were an apparition. "You lied to me," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "but not for the reason you think." Tears blurred her vision. "Everyone said you were crippled. I married you because you thought I needed you," he finished gently. "And you were right, just not in the way they meant." Amara shook her head. "Explain." Elias pulled the fallen wheelchair upright and leaned it against the wall, then sat slowly on the chair opposite her. "I was in an accident 2 years ago," he began. "For a while I couldn't walk. The doctor said it might be permanent." She listened, her chest tight. "I had money then," he continued, "more than most people in this village will ever see. Friends, a fiancé, a future everyone admired." His jaw tightened. "When the rumors spread that I might never walk again, everything changed. My fiancé left me in front of reporters, said she didn't sign up to care for a broken man." Amara swallowed hard. "I learned to walk again," Elias said softly, "but something in me didn't heal. I didn't trust people anymore." He looked at her then, eyes searching her face. "So I disappeared. I sold everything that tied me to my name. I took the wheelchair back out, not because I needed it, but because it showed me who people really were." Amara's voice trembled. "You tested us." "Yes," he admitted. "I tested kindness, faith, love without conditions." Silence fell between them. "And you," he continued, his voice low, "were the only person who said no, not out of cruelty, but honesty. And then, you chose me anyway." Her tears spilled freely now. "I didn't choose you because of a test," she said. "I chose you because I thought God asked me to." Elias nodded. "That's why I stopped the marriage from becoming something it shouldn't be." He stood again, slower this time. "I won't touch you tonight," he said, "or ever, unless you want me to. You didn't marry a lie. You married a man who was hiding." Amara wiped her face. Her heart was aching, but something else stirred beneath the shock. Relief, gratitude, confusion. "You could have told me before," she said quietly. "I know," Elias replied, "and if you hate me for this, I'll accept it." She looked at the wheelchair, then at the simple ring on her finger, then back at him. "I don't hate you," she said at last, "but I need time." He bowed his head. "You have all of it." They spent the rest of the night apart, Amara on the bed, Elias on the couch, but sleep did not come easily to either of them, because by morning nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same again, and neither would they. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself was unsure whether it should announce the day or apologize for it. Amara woke before the sun, her body stiff, her mind restless. For a long moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the night before had been a dream. But when she turned her head and saw the empty space beside the bed, and the wheelchair leaned carefully against the wall, she knew it was real. Everything was real. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress, her fingers brushing the ring on her hand. It felt heavier now, not because it had changed, but because she had. From the small kitchen came the faint sound of movement. Elias was awake. She hesitated before stepping out of the bedroom. He stood at the counter, moving carefully but confidently, pouring water into a chipped kettle. He wore a plain shirt and trousers, no wheelchair in sight. If someone walked in right now, they would see nothing unusual, just a tall man in a quiet kitchen. He turned when he heard her. "Good morning," he said softly. She nodded. "Morning." An awkward silence settled between them, not unfriendly but fragile, like glass that hadn't shattered yet. "I'll make breakfast," Elias offered, "if that's all right." "You don't have to," Amara replied quickly. "I know," he said, giving a faint smile, "but I want to." She watched him as he moved. Every step reminded her of the lie, but also of the truth beneath it. He wasn't pretending anymore, not with her. As they ate in silence, Amara's thoughts drifted to the village, to the church, to Vanessa's eyes sharp with judgment, to the way people whispered even before the marriage. They would find out. She knew it in her bones. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Elias set his fork down. "That depends on you." She frowned. "On me?" "Yes," he said. "If you want the truth to stay between us, I'll honor that. I can leave Willow Creek. I can disappear again." Her heart tightened. "And our marriage?" He met her gaze steadily. "It will be whatever you decide it is." Amara looked down at her hands. She had been praised all her life for being good, for being obedient, for being the girl who never caused trouble, but no one had ever prepared her for this kind of choice. Before she could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp, urgent, they both froze. Another knock followed. "Amara," a voice called. "You in there, child?" "Mama Ruth." Amara's breath caught. She stood quickly. "I'll get it." She opened the door to find her grandmother leaning heavily on her cane, eyes alert despite the sickness weighing on her body. "Well," Mama Ruth said, looking past her, "I see you're both still breathing. That's a blessing." Amara stepped aside to let her in. Mama Ruth's gaze swept the room, then landed on Elias, standing, her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in sharp recognition. "You look taller than you did yesterday," she said slowly. The room went silent. Amara's chest tightened. Elias did not flinch. He stepped forward respectfully. "Ma'am," he said, "I owe you an explanation." Mama Ruth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Sit." They gathered around the small table. Elias told her everything: the accident, the recovery, the test, the lie. Mama Ruth listened without interruption. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. "So," she said calmly, "you wore weakness like clothing." "Yes, Ma'am." "And my granddaughter married you, thinking you couldn't walk." "Yes." Mama Ruth turned to Amara. "And you?" "I didn't know," Amara said softly. "But I chose him anyway." Mama Ruth nodded slowly, then she did something unexpected. She laughed, a soft, dry laugh that surprised them both. "Child," she said, shaking her head, "this village loves to judge broken legs, but they never look for broken hearts." She turned to Elias. "You were wrong to lie." "Yes, Mom, but you were right to look for truth where money couldn't buy it." She rose carefully, leaning on her cane. "Now listen to me both." They did. "This secret won't stay secret," Mama Ruth said. "People here sniff out difference like blood in water." As if summoned by her words, voices drifted in from outside. Laughter, footsteps, then shouting. "Hey!" someone yelled. "Ain't that the beggar walking?" Amara's heart dropped. Elias moved to the window. A small group had gathered across the dirt road. Men, women, faces twisted with disbelief. One woman pointed, another crossed herself. The door rattled as someone knocked hard. Vanessa's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Open up," she called. "We need to talk." Amara looked at Elias, fear flashing across her face. "This is it," she whispered. Elias straightened, something resolute settling over him. "No," he said quietly. "This is the beginning." He reached for the wheelchair and rolled it slowly toward the door. Then he stopped, turned back, and gently pushed it aside. When he opened the door, standing on his own 2 feet, the gasps were loud enough to shake the morning. Vanessa's face drained of color. The village froze. And the truth, long buried beneath rusted wheels and false pity, finally stood upright in the light. For a long moment, no one spoke. The morning air hung thick and unmoving, as if Willow Creek itself had been stunned into silence. Elias stood in the doorway, tall and steady, his shoulders squared, his eyes calm. The wheelchair sat abandoned behind him, half hidden by the doorframe like a secret that no longer mattered. Vanessa King was the first to find her voice. This is some kind of joke," she said, laughing sharply, though her eyes flickered with panic. "You can't walk. I saw you in that chair." Elias looked at her without anger, without triumph. "You saw what I allowed you to see," he replied. A ripple of murmurs spread through the small crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, church members, people who had smiled politely at the wedding and whispered cruelly afterward. He faked it? So the marriage was a lie? "Lord have mercy." Amara stood just behind Elias, her hands clenched in the fabric of her dress. She could feel every word like a stone thrown in her direction. Vanessa stepped closer, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt road. "You embarrassed me," she snapped. "You let me believe you were broken." Elias's jaw tightened. "No, Vanessa, I let you leave." A few people gasped. "You walked away when you thought I had nothing," he continued evenly. "That choice was yours." Vanessa's face flushed. "You did this to make fools of us," she said, gesturing wildly to the crowd. "To test us like lab rats." Mama Ruth stepped forward then, her cane striking the ground with authority. "No," she said firmly. "He tested hearts, and some of y'all failed without even realizing it." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Pastor Lewis pushed his way to the front, his face pale. "Elias," he said carefully, "you must understand the confusion this has caused." Elias nodded. "I do." "And the marriage?" the pastor asked. "Was it real?" All eyes turned to Amara. Her throat tightened. She had never liked being the center of attention, never wanted to be the girl people talked about. But now there was no hiding. She stepped forward, standing beside Elias. "I married the man I thought he was," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "A man who needed kindness. A man who respected me." Someone scoffed. "So you're saying you didn't mind marrying a beggar?" Amara lifted her chin. "I minded marrying someone without love," she replied. "But I didn't mind marrying someone without money." The words settled heavily over the crowd. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "Now that you know who he really is, you expect us to believe this is still some holy love story?" Elias turned to Amara then, his expression serious. "Do you want me to explain everything?" he asked quietly. She hesitated only a second. "Yes," she said. "I don't want lies anymore." He nodded and faced the crowd. "My name is Elias Cole," he announced. "I come from a family with more money than sense. I grew up believing wealth made people loyal." A few heads snapped up in recognition. Someone whispered, "Cole, like the Cole Foundation?" "Yes," Elias confirmed. "That Cole." The murmurs grew louder. "When I was injured, I learned how quickly loyalty disappears," he continued. "I wanted to know if kindness still existed when there was nothing to gain." Vanessa's mouth opened. "You still had money," she protested. Not here, Elias replied. Not as the man in the chair. He gestured toward the wheelchair. That chair showed me more truth than a lifetime of privilege ever did. A man near the back folded his arms. So what? You think this makes you noble? Elias met his gaze. No, it makes me honest now. Silence followed. Then Vanessa stepped forward again, desperation edging her voice. You can't stay married to her, she said. This was all a misunderstanding. You and I, we belong together. Elias shook his head slowly. You wanted a future without inconvenience. Amara chose compassion without guarantee. He turned to the crowd. That is the difference. Vanessa's composure cracked. You think she loves you? She hissed. She didn't even know who you were. And that, Elias said quietly, is exactly why she mattered. The crowd erupted into whispers again, some ashamed, some defensive. Amara felt her heart racing. She had expected judgment. She had expected anger. She had not expected this strange sense of strength. Mama Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. Baby, she whispered, whatever comes next, you stood in truth. That's all God ever asked. Pastor Lewis cleared his throat. This village owes you both an apology, he said reluctantly. Not everyone agreed, but the tone had shifted. As the crowd slowly dispersed, some heads hung low. Others glanced back at Amara with new eyes, not pity this time, but something closer to respect. Vanessa remained, standing alone in the road. This isn't over, she said bitterly. Elias looked at her calmly. For me it is. She turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the dirt. When the road was finally empty, Amara exhaled shakily. I didn't plan any of this, she said. Elias looked at her. Neither did I. But as they stood there together, no chair, no disguise, no crowd, both of them knew something irreversible had happened. The village had seen the lie, but more importantly, it had seen the truth. The quiet that followed the crowd's departure felt heavier than the noise had been. Amara stood beside Elias in the doorway of their small house, watching dust settle back onto the road, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the way her chest rose and fell, in the way her hands trembled when she clasped them together. Elias broke the silence first. There's more, he said quietly. Amara turned to him. More? He nodded. I didn't come to Willow Creek by accident. Mama Ruth, who had settled into a chair near the window, looked up sharply. Then you best finish the truth while you're at it, son. Elias inhaled deeply. The Cole Foundation owns the housing charity that brought me here. I funded it years ago. Amara's breath caught. So the program, the marriage requirement, was real, Elias said. But I controlled who qualified and how. I wanted to live under my own rules for once. No handlers, no lawyers, no name. Mama Ruth shook her head slowly. Lord, the ways people carry pain. Elias continued, his voice steady but heavy. I also transferred control of a trust before the wedding. Amara stared at him. What kind of trust? One that will determine where my inheritance goes, he answered, not to blood alone, but to character. The words unsettled her. You tested the village, she said softly. Yes, Elias replied. But more than that, I tested myself. I wanted to know if I could still choose love without fear. A knock sounded at the door. All three of them tensed. This time it wasn't Vanessa. It was Pastor Lewis, alone. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in hand, eyes downcast. May I come in? Elias stepped aside. The pastor entered, clearing his throat. I've spoken to the elders, he said. What happened today? It exposed more than one truth. He looked at Amara. We were wrong to put you in that position. Faith should never be forced. Amara nodded but said nothing. The pastor turned to Elias. And you, he added carefully, you deceived people. Yes, Elias said plainly. I did. But you also revealed something we didn't want to see, the pastor admitted, that we praise charity loudly, but practice it quietly, if at all. He paused, then added, the village meeting is tonight. Amara frowned. About what? Pastor Lewis hesitated. About you, about the marriage, and about the foundation. Elias straightened. Then I'll attend. That evening, the community hall filled again, this time with tension instead of curiosity. Amara sat beside Elias, Mama Ruth on her other side. Faces turned toward them, some guarded, some ashamed, some calculating. Elias stood when invited to speak. I won't keep this long, he said. This village gave me shelter when I appeared to have nothing. It also showed me who kindness costs something to. Murmurs rippled through the room. The Cole Foundation will invest in Willow Creek, Elias continued. Schools, clinics, jobs. A collective gasp followed. But, he added, raising a hand, not blindly. The room stilled. I have already placed everything I own into a living trust, he said. Its future will be decided by the choices made here. A man stood abruptly. What kind of choices? Elias met his gaze. Who you help when no one is watching. Who you believe when it costs you comfort. Who you protect when there's nothing to gain. Vanessa's voice cut in sharply from the back. And what about her? She demanded, pointing at Amara. She married you under false pretenses. She deserves nothing. Amara felt her face burn. Elias turned slowly toward Vanessa. She deserves everything, he said calmly. But she is owed nothing. The room grew quiet again. Elias turned to Amara. This marriage began under confusion, he said. You are free to leave it. If you choose to walk away, I will still provide for your grandmother's care, no conditions. Amara's heart thundered in her chest. All eyes turned to her. This was the test she had never asked for. She stood slowly. I didn't marry Elias Cole, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I married a man in a wheelchair because I believed God asked me to love without guarantee. She looked at Elias. I won't stay because of money, and I won't leave because of fear. A hush fell over the hall. I choose to stay, she said, not as a reward, not as an experiment, but as a wife, if he'll still have me. Elias swallowed hard. He stepped toward her, lowering himself onto one knee. Not because you passed a test, he said quietly, but because you taught me what truth looks like. Tears streamed down Amara's face as she nodded. The village sat frozen. Some hearts broke, some hearts changed, some hardened further. But one thing was certain. The test was over, and the results would echo far beyond Willow Creek. The room remained silent long after Amara's words settled into the air. I choose to stay. They echoed through the community hall like a bell struck once and left to ring on its own. Elias was still on one knee before her, his head bowed, his hand extended but not touching her. For a moment, Amara wondered if she had imagined the way his breath trembled, the way his shoulders seemed heavier than before, not with fear, but with the weight of being seen completely. Then he looked up at her, not as the man who tested a village, not as the heir to a fortune, but as a husband asking permission to remain one. If you stay, he said quietly, so quietly only those closest could hear, there will be no more tests, no secrets, no masks. Amara nodded, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. That's all I ever wanted. A murmur spread through the hall, this time different from before, less sharp, less cruel, conflicted. Vanessa laughed suddenly, the sound brittle and loud. This is unbelievable, she said, stepping forward. You're really throwing away everything for her? Elias rose to his feet and turned to face her. I'm not throwing anything away, he replied calmly. I'm choosing. Vanessa's eyes burned. She doesn't belong in your world. Elias met her gaze evenly. Neither did you. The words landed like a slap. Vanessa's composure shattered. I loved you, she cried, before the accident, before the rumors. Elias shook his head slowly. You loved certainty. You loved comfort. When those disappeared, so did you. The room was utterly still. Vanessa's face crumpled, not with regret, but with humiliation. She turned sharply and stormed toward the exit, her heels echoing against the wooden floor until the doors slammed behind her. No one followed. Pastor Lewis stood slowly. What happens now? He asked. Elias looked around the room, at the people who had judged him, pitied him, ignored him, and finally listened. Now, he said, choices matter. He gestured toward the elders seated along the wall. The foundation funds will not be distributed based on titles or influence. They will be allocated based on action. A man scoffed. And who decides that? I do, Elias replied, along with my wife. Every head snapped toward Amara. She stiffened, surprised. Me? Elias nodded. You see what I once refused to, and you see it without bitterness. The elders exchanged glances. And what about the past? One woman asked cautiously. What about those who failed? Amara took a breath and stood again. I don't believe punishment heals people, she said softly, but consequences teach. She turned to the crowd. Some of you praised me loudly while offering nothing quietly. Some of you condemned a man you didn't know. Some of you used faith to avoid compassion. Her voice did not accuse. It simply told the truth. But I also saw fear, she continued, and fear can change if we let it. Mama Ruth smiled faintly from her seat. Elias watched Amara with something close to awe. The clinic will be funded, Amara said. The school will be repaired, but aid will come with responsibility, not to please us, but to protect each other. Silence followed. Then someone began to clap, slowly, hesitantly. One clap became several. The applause was not loud, it was not proud, but it was real. Later that night, Amara and Elias walked home together, beneath a sky full of stars. The air was cool, the road quiet. You didn't have to choose me publicly, Elias said at last. I did, Amara replied, because I was done being silent. They stopped in front of their small house. Elias hesitated. I know this marriage began strangely, he said. If you want time, space. Amara stepped closer. I don't want perfection, she said. I want honesty. He nodded. Then you have me. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing inside. Inside that house, there was still uncertainty, still healing, still learning, but there was no longer fear, because the choice Amara made that night did more than shock the village. It redefined power, it redefined worth, it redefined love, and somewhere deep within Willow Creek, something long dormant had finally begun to grow. The transformation of Willow Creek did not happen overnight. Change never does. But it began quietly, like dawn creeping over a long, dark horizon. The morning after the village meeting, Amara woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. For a moment she forgot everything that had happened. Then she felt the weight of the ring on her finger and remembered. She rose and found Elias at the stove, carefully stirring a pot of oatmeal. I hope you don't mind, he said. I figured we could start simple. Amara smiled faintly. Simple sounds good. They ate together at the small table, sunlight spilling across the floor. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just two people learning how to share space honestly. Later that day, Mama Ruth was admitted to a better medical facility, one funded quietly and efficiently. No announcements, no plaques, just care. When Amara visited her that evening, Mama Ruth squeezed her hand. "You did good, baby," she said. "You chose love without losing yourself." Amara swallowed back tears. "I was scared." Mama Ruth smiled. "Courage usually is." As weeks passed, Elias kept his word. The foundation's money did not flood the village blindly. Instead, it flowed carefully. Into the clinic, into the school, into small businesses run by people who had shown up when it mattered. Some villagers were surprised to be passed over. Others were stunned to be chosen. No explanations were given, only opportunities. Vanessa King did not return to Willow Creek. News reached them eventually. She had tried to challenge the trust legally and failed. Her public image, once polished and admired, cracked under scrutiny. The world she valued so highly had little patience for exposed intentions. Elias did not celebrate her downfall. "Bitterness doesn't need applause," he told Amara quietly one night. Their marriage grew slowly. There were awkward moments, long conversations, silences filled not with fear, but with thought. Elias never rushed her, never demanded affection. He treated her body and her trust with reverence. One evening, months later, Amara stood at the doorway of the bedroom and said softly, "I'm ready." Elias looked at her, emotion tightening his throat. "Only if you're sure." She nodded. What followed was not passion fueled by secrecy or shock, but intimacy built on choice, respect, time, and love. The village noticed the difference. Amara was no longer spoken about in whispers. She was consulted, respected. Young girls came to her for advice. Women watched her with a mixture of admiration and wonder. "She didn't change," one woman said. "The world around her did." A year later, the community gathered again, this time for celebration. The clinic was complete. The school reopened with fresh paint and full classrooms. Children laughed freely where fear once lived. Elias stood beside Amara at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, not as a benefactor above them, but as part of them. Pastor Lewis bowed his head in humility as he spoke. "This village once mistook charity for righteousness," he said, "but love showed us better." Applause filled the air, loud this time, unashamed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Amara and Elias walked the same dirt road where he had once rolled a wheelchair behind him like armor. They stopped beneath the oak tree. "I kept it," Elias said suddenly. She frowned. "Kept what?" "The wheelchair." Amara looked at him in surprise. "Not because I need it," he continued, "but because I never want to forget who I was when I learned the truth." She reached for his hand. "Then we'll keep it," she said. "As a reminder of humility, of compassion, of how easily people misjudge worth." That night, as they lay together, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, Amara rested her head against Elias's chest. "I married a beggar," she whispered. He smiled. "And I was one." She lifted her head to look at him. "Not for money, not for love, but for grace." He kissed her gently. "You gave me back my humanity." Outside, Willow Creek slept peacefully. A village once ruled by judgment now carried a legacy of mercy, and the story that began with shame ended with something far more powerful: hope. Thanks for watching this amazing story till the end. You all have a wonderful day.